In today's video, I'm going to tell you about one of the most classified and intense operations I ever participated in, a mission that involved America's most advanced stealth bomber, the B-2 Spirit, and a small team of forward air controllers who had to guide this invisible ghost to its target. This wasn't just another bombing run. This was Shadow Strike, and it nearly cost us everything. Don't leave this video, because I'm going to tell you every detail of this operation that changed everything I thought I knew about modern warfare. Every day on this channel, we bring you new, real stories from military operations I lived through during my quarter-century of service as a sergeant major in the United States Army. Before we dive deep into Shadow Strike, make sure to hit that like button if you appreciate real military stories, subscribe to this channel so you're notified when I post new operations from my service years, and drop a comment below telling me what you think about stealth technology in modern warfare. Also, don't forget that all the gear and products I use and recommend are linked in the description of this video or pinned in the first comment. Now, let me take you back to the spring of 2003. The world was a different place then. Tensions were running high in the Middle East, and intelligence networks were working overtime to track potential threats to American interests and our allies. That's when the call came through channels that made even seasoned operators like myself sit up and take notice. I was stationed at a forward operating base in a classified location. Let's just say it was close enough to the action that we could hear the rumble of distant artillery on quiet nights. My team and I were part of a specialized forward air controller unit, guys who had been handpicked for our ability to coordinate precision strikes with aircraft of all types. We'd worked with F-16S, A-10 Warthogs, Apache helicopters, you name it. We'd painted targets for it, but nothing, and I mean nothing, had prepared us for what was coming. The briefing room was more crowded than usual that morning. Alongside the regular intelligence officers and mission planners, there were faces I didn't recognize, guys in civilian clothes with security clearances that probably cost more than my annual salary. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut with a K-bar knife. Colonel Martinez, our commanding officer, stood at the front of the room with a grim expression that told us this wasn't going to be a routine operation. Behind him, a large screen displayed satellite imagery of what looked like an industrial complex nestled in a valley between two mountain ridges. The resolution was so clear you could almost count the rivets on the buildings. "Gentlemen," the colonel began, his voice carrying the weight of classified authority, "what you're about to hear doesn't leave this room. 3 weeks ago, our intelligence assets identified this facility." He pointed to the screen with a laser pointer that created a red dot on the main building. Initial assessment suggested it was a manufacturing plant for conventional weapons. We were wrong. He clicked to the next slide, and the room fell dead silent. The image showed underground tunnel entrances, heavily fortified positions, and what appeared to be cooling systems that were far too sophisticated for conventional weapons production. Recent human intelligence and signal intercepts have confirmed our worst fears. This facility is a nuclear enrichment plant, and according to our sources, they're closer to weapons-grade material than anyone in Washington is comfortable with. The facility needs to be neutralized completely and permanently before they can move their operation or complete their current batch of enriched uranium. Staff Sergeant Johnson, my radio operator, let out a low whistle beside me. We all knew what this meant. This wasn't about capturing territory or eliminating enemy combatants. This was about preventing a nuclear weapon from falling into the wrong hands. The colonel continued, "Traditional bombing runs are out of the question. The facility is too well defended with surface-to-air missile systems, and the target is too valuable to risk missing. One mistake, one bomb that doesn't find its mark, and they'll move the operation underground where we'll never reach it." That's when another officer stood up, an Air Force colonel I'd never seen before. His insignia indicated he was from Strategic Air Command, and the patches on his uniform suggested he worked with aircraft that most people never even knew existed. "This is where it gets interesting, soldiers," he said, his voice carrying a hint of pride that only pilots seem to possess. "We're bringing in the B-2 Spirit for this mission. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of working with America's most advanced strategic bomber, let me educate you." He clicked to a new slide, and there she was, the B-2 Spirit in all her angular, otherworldly glory. Even in the photograph, the aircraft looked like something that had dropped out of a science fiction movie. Her distinctive triangular shape and grey coating seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "The B-2 Spirit is invisible to conventional radar systems," the Air Force colonel explained. "She can penetrate enemy airspace undetected, deliver precision munitions, and exit without the enemy ever knowing she was there. But here's the catch. Even with all her advanced technology, she still needs eyes on the ground to ensure target accuracy." And that's when I knew why we were in that briefing room. "Sergeant Major Harris," Colonel Martinez called my name, and every head in the room turned toward me. "Your team has been selected to serve as forward air controllers for this operation. You'll infiltrate the target area, establish observation positions, and guide the B-2 to its target using laser designation equipment." The weight of responsibility hit me like a freight train. We weren't just calling in an airstrike. We were guiding a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrying ordnance that could level city blocks. The margin for error was exactly zero. My team consisted of 4 men, each one a specialist in his own right. There was Staff Sergeant Michael Johnson, my radio operator and communications specialist. That man could establish contact with satellites using nothing but spare radio parts and determination. Then we had Sergeant First Class David Thompson, our reconnaissance expert and sniper. If someone needed to be eliminated silently, or if we needed intelligence on enemy movements, Thompson was our man. Corporal James Wilson handled our heavy equipment and demolitions. He could jury-rig explosive devices from household chemicals or repair sophisticated laser targeting systems with a paperclip and some electrical tape. Finally, there was Specialist Robert Martinez, no relation to our colonel, our medic and close-quarters combat specialist. In a tight spot, Martinez could patch you up and fight his way out simultaneously. The mission parameters were straightforward in theory, but complex in execution. We would be inserted via helicopter, approximately 15 kilometers from the target facility, under cover of darkness. From there, we'd have to move on foot through hostile territory, establish observation positions overlooking the facility, and remain undetected while conducting reconnaissance for 72 hours. During that time, we'd map enemy patrol patterns, identify defensive positions, and most importantly, confirm the exact location of the nuclear materials within the facility. Once the B-2 Spirit was inbound, we'd use laser designators to mark the precise impact points for the bunker buster bombs she'd be carrying. The intelligence briefing revealed that the facility was guarded by approximately 200 enemy combatants, equipped with modern weapons and organized into professional military units. They had established overlapping fields of fire, regular patrol schedules, and sophisticated communication equipment. These weren't insurgents or militia members. These were trained soldiers protecting what they knew was a high-value target. The terrain around the facility presented its own challenges. The valley was surrounded by steep ridges that provided excellent observation positions but limited escape routes. The vegetation was sparse, offering little natural concealment during daylight hours. Weather reports indicated the possibility of sandstorms during our operational window, which could provide concealment but would also interfere with our laser targeting systems. Equipment preparation took 2 full days. Our standard combat load was modified to include specialized gear for the mission. Each man carried an M4 carbine with night vision capabilities, body armor rated for rifle rounds, and enough ammunition for sustained combat. Additionally, We packed laser designators, secure communication equipment, medical supplies, and food and water for 5 days, 2 more than the planned mission duration, just in case things went sideways. The laser designator was the most critical piece of equipment we'd be carrying. This device, roughly the size of a small telescope, would emit an invisible infrared beam that the B-2's guidance systems could detect and follow to the target. The beam had to remain steady on the target during the entire bombing run, which meant whoever was operating it would be exposed and vulnerable during the most dangerous part of the mission. We spent hours in the simulator, practicing the target designation procedures until we could do them blindfolded. The B-2's bombs were precision-guided munitions capable of penetrating several feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. Once those bombs were released, there would be no calling them back, no second chances, and no room for error. The night before insertion, I gathered my team for a final briefing in our temporary quarters. These men had served with me through multiple deployments, and I trusted each one with my life. But this mission was different, and we all knew it. "Listen up," I told them as we sat around a table covered with maps and photographs. "Tomorrow night, we're going to be part of something that will never appear in any history book. The success of this mission could prevent a nuclear weapon from being completed, but if we screw this up, we might not live to regret it." Johnson looked up from the radio equipment he was inspecting for the 100th time. "Sergeant Major, what's our extraction plan if things go south before the bombing run?" It was a good question, one that had been bothering me since the initial briefing. "Our primary extraction is scheduled for 74 hours after insertion, 2 hours after the bombing run is complete. If we miss that window, we have emergency extraction points at 12-hour intervals for the following 3 days. After that," I paused, letting the implications sink in. "After that, we're on our own until we can reach friendly lines." Thompson nodded grimly while cleaning his rifle. "What about civilian casualties? That facility looked pretty isolated in the satellite images, but there might be workers who don't know what they're really manufacturing." "Intel suggests the facility operates with minimal staff during night hours," I replied. "The bombing run is scheduled for 0300 local time to minimize potential civilian casualties. But remember, gentlemen, our primary mission is to prevent a nuclear weapon from being completed. Everything else is secondary." The weight of that statement settled over the room like a heavy blanket. We all understood the implications. Sometimes, in the business of protecting national security, impossible decisions have to be made by people like us. Wilson looked up from the demolition charges he was preparing. "Sergeant Major, if we get compromised before the B-2 arrives, what's our protocol for the laser designator?" "If we're compromised but still able to complete the mission, we complete it," I said firmly. "If capture is imminent and we can't destroy the designator, we use the emergency destruction charges. Under no circumstances can that technology fall into enemy hands." As the evening wore on, we went through our equipment one final time, checked and double-checked our maps, and reviewed emergency procedures until everyone could recite them from memory. The B-2 Spirit would be making this journey from a base thousands of miles away, flying for over 20 hours to reach our target. We had to be ready. The insertion helicopter was a specially modified Black Hawk, equipped with additional fuel tanks and radar-absorbing materials to minimize its signature. The pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Sarah Chen, had flown special operations missions for over 15 years and had a reputation for getting teams in and out of places that didn't exist on any map. As we loaded our gear into the helicopter, Chen approached me with a serious expression. "Sergeant Major, I want you to know that this bird has been modified specifically for this mission. We can fly lower and quieter than standard Black Hawks, but our fuel margins are tight. If you need emergency extraction before the scheduled pickup, we might not have enough fuel to reach you and make it back to base." I nodded, understanding the implications. Chief, we'll be where we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there. Just make sure you are too. She smiled grimly and returned to her pre-flight checks. Military aviation requires a level of trust between aircrew and ground forces that civilians can't fully comprehend. She was trusting us to complete our mission so she could complete hers. We were trusting her to get us to the target and bring us home. The flight to the insertion point took 2 hours through hostile airspace, flying at extremely low altitude to avoid radar detection. The helicopter's engines had been modified to reduce noise, but inside the cabin, the vibration was constant and intense. We sat in full combat gear, weapons ready, each man lost in his own thoughts about what lay ahead. As we approached the insertion point, Chen's voice crackled through our headsets. 5 minutes to drop off. Weather report indicates clear skies with minimal wind. Remember, gentlemen, I'll be monitoring the emergency frequencies, but radio silence is in effect until mission completion or emergency extraction. I looked at each member of my team one final time before we stepped into hostile territory. Johnson was methodically checking his radio equipment, his face a mask of professional concentration. Thompson was studying satellite photos of the terrain we'd be crossing, memorizing every ridge and valley. Wilson was securing the laser designator in a protective case, knowing that our entire mission depended on that single piece of equipment. Martinez was checking his medical supplies, knowing that he might be the only thing standing between his teammates and death in the hours ahead. 2 minutes, Chen announced. We moved to the helicopter's doors, weapons ready, adrenaline building. This was it, the moment where months of planning and preparation would meet the unpredictable reality of combat operations. The Black Hawk settled into a hover, just long enough for us to fast rope to the ground, then disappeared into the darkness as quickly as it had arrived. We were alone in enemy territory, 15 kilometers from a nuclear facility, with nothing but our training, our equipment, and our trust in each other to see us through the next 72 hours. The silence that followed the helicopter's departure was absolute. We were committed now, no turning back, no calling for help unless everything went wrong. Somewhere above us, invisible to radar and impossible to hear, a B-2 Spirit was beginning its long journey to meet us at coordinates we had memorized but had never seen. Shadow Strike had begun. We moved in tactical formation through terrain that looked like the surface of Mars under our night vision goggles. The landscape was a mixture of rocky outcroppings and loose sand that seemed designed to make noise with every step. Every sound we made could potentially alert enemy patrols to our presence, and every minute that passed brought us closer to dawn, when our movement would become exponentially more dangerous. I led the formation with Thompson providing overwatch from elevated positions as we moved. Johnson stayed close behind me, monitoring radio frequencies for any indication that our insertion had been detected. Wilson carried the precious laser designator and additional technical equipment, while Martinez brought up the rear, constantly scanning our back trail for signs of pursuit. The intelligence reports had been accurate about the terrain. The valley containing the nuclear facility was surrounded by steep ridges that rose nearly 1,000 feet above the valley floor. The approach we'd chosen would take us along a series of interconnected ravines that would provide concealment, but would also channel us through predictable routes that enemy forces might be monitoring. After 2 hours of careful movement, we reached our first checkpoint, a rocky outcropping that provided our first visual of the target facility. Through binoculars and night vision equipment, the installation looked exactly like the satellite photographs, but seeing it with your own eyes was different. This wasn't just a collection of buildings on a computer screen. This was a real place with real people who would do everything in their power to stop us from completing our mission. The facility was larger than I had anticipated from the briefings. The main building was a concrete structure, approximately 4 stories tall, with no windows and heavily reinforced walls. Surrounding it were several smaller buildings that appeared to house support equipment, living quarters for the staff, and what looked like a vehicle maintenance facility. But what caught my attention immediately were the defensive positions. Intelligence had estimated approximately 200 enemy combatants, but from our observation position, I could see evidence of a much more sophisticated defense network than we'd been briefed on. There were guard towers positioned at regular intervals around the perimeter, each one equipped with searchlights and what appeared to be heavy machine gun positions. Thompson whispered into his throat microphone, "Sergeant Major, I count at least 8 guard towers, and there are patrol routes between them that weren't in our intelligence reports. These guys are taking security seriously." Through my binoculars, I watched as 2-man patrol teams moved in predictable patterns around the facility's perimeter. They were well-equipped and disciplined, maintaining proper spacing and communication protocols. These weren't militia members playing soldier. These were professional military personnel who understood exactly what they were protecting. "Johnson," I whispered, "any radio traffic?" He adjusted his equipment and listened for several minutes before responding. "Sergeant Major, they're using encrypted communications on multiple frequencies. Professional-grade stuff, not the amateur radio equipment we usually encounter. I can detect the transmissions, but I can't break the encryption without more sophisticated equipment than we're carrying." This was our first indication that the mission might be more complicated than the intelligence reports had suggested. Professional communications equipment meant professional soldiers, which meant professional training and professional discipline. It also meant they were less likely to make the kinds of mistakes that would give us opportunities to exploit. Wilson had been studying the facility through a specialized scope that could detect heat signatures. "Sergeant Major, there's definitely activity inside the main building even at this hour. I'm seeing heat patterns that suggest machinery running continuously. Whatever they're doing in there, they're doing it around the clock." That confirmed our worst fears about the facility's purpose. Nuclear enrichment is a continuous process that can't be stopped and started at will. If they were operating around the clock, it meant they were further along in the weapons development process than intelligence had estimated. We spent the next 4 hours moving to our primary observation position on a ridge approximately 3 kilometers from the facility. This location would give us the angles we needed for laser designation while providing multiple escape routes if things went wrong. But getting there required crossing open ground where we'd be exposed to both visual and electronic detection. The movement across open terrain was one of the most nerve-wracking experiences of my military career. We moved 1 man at a time, with the others providing overwatch, covering approximately 50 meters with each bound. The sand seemed to amplify every footstep, and the lack of vegetation meant there was no natural sound to mask our movement. Martinez was crossing a particularly exposed section when Wilson's voice crackled through our earpieces. "Movement 2 o'clock, approximately 800 meters." We all froze instantly. Through my night vision scope, I could see a patrol moving along a ridgeline that wasn't supposed to have any enemy activity, according to our intelligence reports. 2 soldiers were walking slowly, scanning the terrain with night vision equipment of their own. Martinez was caught in the open, too far from cover to reach safety before the patrol would spot him. Thompson was already adjusting his rifle, preparing to eliminate the threat if necessary, but gunfire would compromise the entire mission before it had really begun. I made a decision that I've second-guessed 1,000 times since that night. Instead of risking a firefight, we waited. Martinez pressed himself against a small boulder and remained absolutely motionless, while the enemy patrol passed within 300 meters of his position. For 20 minutes, none of us moved. None of us breathed normally, and all of us wondered if our mission was about to end before the real work had even begun. The patrol finally moved on, apparently having detected nothing unusual. Martinez completed his movement to the next position, and we continued toward our observation post. But the encounter had changed everything. The enemy had patrols operating in areas that intelligence had told us were clear. If they were wrong about patrol patterns, what else might they be wrong about? We reached our primary observation position just as the first hint of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon. The position was everything we'd hoped for. Excellent visibility of the entire facility, multiple escape routes, and natural concealment that would hide us from casual observation. But as the sun came up, we got our first clear look at what we were really facing. In daylight, the nuclear facility looked like a small military base. The defensive positions were more extensive than night vision had revealed. The patrol patterns were more complex, and there was significantly more personnel moving around the compound than intelligence had estimated. Instead of a lightly defended research facility, we were looking at a hardened military installation, designed to withstand exactly the kind of attack we were planning. Thompson had been studying the facility through high-powered optics for an hour when he made a discovery that changed everything. "Sergeant Major, you need to see this. Third building from the left, near the main gate." I looked through my own scope and immediately saw what had caught his attention. Parked next to what appeared to be an administrative building were 3 vehicles that made my blood run cold. They were mobile surface-to-air missile launchers, sophisticated systems capable of engaging aircraft at high altitudes and long ranges. "Those are SA-15 systems," Thompson continued. "Russian-made, radar-guided, effective up to 40,000 feet. If they're operational, they can engage the B-2 even at cruising altitude." This was information that had to be transmitted to higher headquarters immediately, but it also posed a serious problem. Radio transmissions could be detected and triangulated, potentially revealing our position. But if the B-2 Spirit flew into an ambush because we failed to report the missile systems, the mission would fail catastrophically. Johnson had been monitoring radio frequencies since dawn, and his report wasn't encouraging. "Sergeant Major, their communication security is better than anything we've encountered before. They're using frequency-hopping, encrypted radios with what sounds like military-grade protocols. If we transmit, they'll know someone is out here, even if they can't pinpoint our exact location immediately." I had to make another difficult decision. The presence of surface-to-air missiles changed the entire dynamic of the mission. The B-2 Spirit was virtually invisible to radar, but if the enemy knew it was coming, they could use visual tracking and infrared systems to engage it. Our mission had been predicated on complete surprise, and that surprise might already be compromised. After careful consideration, I decided to transmit a brief coded message reporting the missile systems. The transmission lasted less than 30 seconds, but in the world of electronic warfare, 30 seconds was an eternity. If the enemy had direction-finding equipment, they now knew that someone was observing their facility. The response from headquarters came back 2 hours later, also in coded format. The mission was still approved, but the B-2's approach would be modified to account for the missile threat. Instead of a high-altitude bombing run, the aircraft would approach at extremely low altitude, using terrain masking to avoid radar detection until the last possible moment. This change in flight profile would make our job as forward air controllers significantly more difficult. Low-altitude approaches meant shorter target acquisition times, less room for error, and increased vulnerability for both the aircraft and our ground team. The laser designation would have to be absolutely perfect on the first attempt. As the day progressed, we continued our surveillance of the facility, mapping patrol patterns, identifying key personnel, and looking for any weaknesses in their security that we could exploit. The more we observed, the more impressed and concerned we became with their professionalism. The enemy changed their patrol routes every 4 hours, rotated personnel through different positions to prevent complacency, and maintained constant communication with their headquarters. They conducted random vehicle searches at the main gate, varied the timing of shift changes, and even had counter-surveillance teams that periodically swept the surrounding ridges for signs of observation. Wilson had been analyzing the facility's construction and defensive positions when he made another disturbing discovery. "Sergeant Major, look at the main building's roof. Those aren't just air conditioning units up there." I studied the roof through high-powered optics and realized he was right. What had appeared in satellite photographs to be routine building infrastructure was actually a sophisticated early warning system. There were multiple radar dishes, communication arrays, and what appeared to be optical sensors designed to detect incoming aircraft. "They know something's coming," I said quietly. "This isn't the defensive posture of a facility conducting routine research. They're expecting an attack." The implications were serious. If the enemy knew that an attack was imminent, they might have additional defenses that weren't visible from our observation position. They might have reinforcements standing by, additional weapon systems hidden inside buildings, or evacuation procedures that would allow them to remove the nuclear materials before we could destroy the facility. Martinez had been monitoring the facility's personnel patterns when he noticed something that confirmed our worst fears. "Sergeant Major, vehicle activity has increased significantly since noon. I count at least 6 trucks that have arrived since we've been observing, and they're all heading to the main building." Through binoculars, we could see that the trucks weren't delivering supplies or equipment. Instead, personnel were loading items from the building into the vehicles. If they were beginning to evacuate the nuclear materials, our mission window might be closing faster than anyone had anticipated. I made the decision to transmit another coded message to headquarters, reporting the increased activity and our assessment that the enemy might be preparing to evacuate. The response was immediate and unambiguous. The mission timeline was being accelerated. The B-2 Spirit would arrive at our coordinates in 18 hours, instead of the originally planned 36 hours. This accelerated timeline created a cascade of new problems. We had positioned ourselves for a leisurely surveillance mission, followed by a carefully planned laser designation. Now we had to compress our preparation time while maintaining our observation responsibilities and somehow remaining undetected by an increasingly alert enemy force. As afternoon turned to evening, the activity at the facility continued to increase. More vehicles arrived, more personnel were active around the main building, and the security patrols became more frequent and more thorough. It was becoming clear that our presence in the area might have been detected, even if our exact location remained unknown. Thompson had been monitoring one particular patrol that seemed to be searching the ridgelines more systematically than the others. "Sergeant Major, that 4-man team has been working their way along the eastern ridge for the past 2 hours. They're not following a routine patrol pattern, they're conducting a deliberate search." I studied the patrol through my scope and realized he was correct. Instead of walking predetermined routes, they were examining terrain features, checking potential hiding places, and using sophisticated optical equipment to scan areas that provided good observation positions. They were looking for us. "Time to move," I decided. "We can't risk being discovered before the B-2 arrives. Johnson, calculate the best route to our alternate observation position. Wilson, make sure that laser designator is ready for immediate use. Thompson, maintain overwatch on that search patrol. Martinez, prepare for rapid movement." The alternate observation position was approximately 2 kilometers south of our current location, still within laser designation range, but offering different concealment and escape routes. Moving during daylight was risky, but staying in a position that might be discovered was even riskier. The movement to our alternate position required crossing a valley that was partially visible from the facility. We moved one man at a time during brief periods when the guard tower's attention was focused in other directions. It took 3 hours to cover 2 kilometers, but we reached the alternate position without detection. From our new location, the facility looked different but equally formidable. We were closer to the main building, which would improve our laser designation accuracy, but we were also more exposed to the roving patrols that continued to search the surrounding terrain. As night fell, our mission entered its critical phase. The B-2 Spirit was somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, flying toward our coordinates with enough firepower to level city blocks. In approximately 12 hours, that aircraft would depend on us to guide its weapons to targets that had to be destroyed with absolute precision. But before I continue this story, I want to recommend something that's been making a total difference in my life. You know, as you get older, you start noticing things, maybe a little more fatigue than usual, less motivation, and let's be honest, things just aren't as firm and reliable as they used to be in the bedroom. I started using a product that completely changed my life and confidence. It's natural, effective, and gave me back that energy and performance I thought I'd lost forever. My wife noticed the difference immediately, if you know what I mean. I've left the link in the description of this video or in the first pinned comment. Trust me on this one, it's worth checking out. Now it's time to continue our story. The night before the B-2's arrival was the longest night of my military career. We maintained constant observation of the facility while preparing for the laser designation that would guide America's most advanced bomber to its target. Every piece of equipment was checked and double-checked, every procedure was rehearsed until it became automatic, and every possible contingency was planned for. Johnson had established communication protocols with the approaching B-2 using encrypted burst transmissions that lasted only seconds to avoid detection. The aircraft was maintaining strict radio silence, but it would begin accepting targeting data from our position beginning at 0200 hours. Wilson had the laser designator calibrated and ready. This device, roughly the size of a small telescope, would emit an invisible infrared beam that the B-2's guidance systems could detect and follow to the target. The beam had to remain steady on the exact impact point during the entire bombing run, which could last several minutes, depending on the aircraft's approach angle and altitude. Thompson had mapped every defensive position around the facility and identified the most likely threats to our operation. The mobile missile systems were still parked near the main building, but they hadn't shown any signs of activity since our arrival. Either they weren't operational, or the enemy was waiting for a specific threat before activating them. Martinez had established multiple escape routes from our position and calculated the time required to reach each one. If we were discovered during the bombing run, we'd have approximately 10 minutes to clear the area before enemy reinforcements could surround our position. At midnight, everything changed. Vehicle activity at the facility increased dramatically, with trucks and personnel carriers arriving and departing every few minutes. Through night vision optics, we could see that something significant was happening inside the main building. "They're accelerating whatever they're doing in there," Wilson observed. "Heat signatures are off the charts, and there's constant movement between the main building and those trucks." I made a decision that probably saved the entire mission. Instead of waiting for our scheduled 0200 hours communication window, I transmitted an emergency burst message to the B-2. "Target showing signs of evacuation. Recommend immediate acceleration of timeline." The response came back within minutes. "Roger. ETA now 0330. Be ready for immediate target designation upon arrival." We now had 3.5 hours instead of 6 to prepare for the most critical moment of the mission. The B-2 Spirit was pushing its limits to reach us ahead of schedule, and we had to be ready to guide it to a target that might be empty by the time the bombs arrived. As we prepared for the final phase of Shadow Strike, I couldn't help but think about the technology that was converging on this remote facility. Somewhere above us, invisible to radar and impossible to hear, $2 billion worth of American aerospace engineering was racing toward coordinates we had provided. In a few hours, that aircraft would depend entirely on our ability to mark a target with a laser beam while under fire from professional soldiers who would do anything to protect their nuclear weapons program. The most advanced bomber in history was about to meet 4 soldiers with night vision goggles and a laser pointer in a valley that didn't exist on any map. And somehow, we had to make it work. At 0315 hours 15 minutes before the B-2's scheduled arrival, everything went to hell. Thompson's voice crackled through our earpieces with deadly urgency. Multiple vehicles approaching from the northeast. Looks like a full company of reinforcements, maybe more. Through night vision, I watched as a convoy of military trucks wound their way up the access road to the facility. This wasn't routine supply delivery. This was a combat unit moving into defensive positions. Someone had tipped them off that an attack was imminent. Johnson, any intercepts on their communications? Negative, Sergeant Major. They're maintaining radio silence, but their movements are too coordinated to be random. They know we're here. The convoy consisted of at least 12 vehicles carrying what appeared to be additional personnel and heavy weapons. As they reached the facility, soldiers immediately began establishing defensive positions around the perimeter, focusing their attention on the ridge lines where a forward air controller team might be hiding. Wilson was monitoring the laser designator when he made another disturbing discovery. Sergeant Major, those mobile missile systems just powered up. I'm seeing active radar emissions and what looks like target acquisition procedures. The surface-to-air missile systems that had been dormant since our arrival were now fully operational. If they had acquired the B-2 on radar, which seemed impossible given the aircraft's stealth capabilities, our mission was about to become a catastrophic failure. Could they have detected the B-2? Martinez asked the question we were all thinking. Negative, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. The B-2's radar cross-section is smaller than a bird. They can't track what they can't see. But even as I said it, I wondered if we were dealing with radar technology more advanced than intelligence had estimated. The Russians had been developing counter-stealth systems for years, and if this facility was important enough to warrant around-the-clock nuclear enrichment, it might be important enough to warrant their most sophisticated defensive systems. At 0325, Johnson received a burst transmission from the approaching B-2. Shadow Strike ground team, this is Ghost Rider. 5 minutes to target area. Confirm laser designation readiness. This was it. 2 years of planning, months of preparation, and 72 hours of infiltration were about to culminate in the next few minutes. Wilson activated the laser designator and began the target acquisition sequence. Laser active and painting primary target, he reported. Beam is steady and locked onto the main building's southwest corner as briefed. Through binoculars, I could see increased activity around the facility as the enemy reinforcements completed their deployment. They had established overlapping fields of fire covering all approaches to the compound and positioned heavy weapons at strategic points around the perimeter. If they detected our laser beam or spotted the incoming B-2, they would have overwhelming firepower concentrated on a very small area. Ghost Rider, this is Shadow Strike, Johnson transmitted. Primary target is painted and holding steady. Be advised, enemy has reinforced defensive positions and activated surface-to-air systems. Roger, Shadow Strike. We have you on thermal. Maintain laser designation. Beginning final approach. That's when I realized the B-2 crew could see us on their thermal imaging systems. We were invisible to the enemy forces below, but we showed up clearly on the advanced sensors of America's most sophisticated bomber. The technology gap between our equipment and theirs was measured in decades and billions of dollars. Wilson was maintaining the laser designation when Thompson's voice cut through our communications. Movement on the eastern ridge. Patrol team is approximately 400 meters out and closing. They're moving directly toward our position. I looked through night vision and saw a 4-man enemy patrol working their way along the ridgeline, systematically checking every possible hiding place. They weren't following a random search pattern. They were conducting a deliberate sweep, and their path would bring them directly to our position within 10 minutes. "How long until bombs on target?" I asked Johnson. "Ghost Rider estimates 3 minutes to weapon release. Another 90 seconds for impact, 4.5 minutes. We had to maintain laser designation for 4.5 more minutes while an enemy patrol moved toward our position, and surface-to-air missiles tracked the sky for any sign of incoming aircraft. Thompson, can you delay that patrol without compromising the mission?" "Negative, Sergeant Major. Any gunfire will alert the entire facility, but I can create a diversion that might buy us some time." Thompson had spotted a loose rock formation approximately 200 meters from our position. Using his rifle scope, he could potentially cause a rock slide that would draw the patrol's attention away from our hiding place. It was risky. The noise might alert other patrols, but it was better than being discovered during the critical laser designation phase. "Do it," I decided. Thompson adjusted his aim and fired a single suppressed shot at the rock formation. The sound was barely audible, but the effect was immediate. Several large rocks broke loose and tumbled down the slope, creating exactly the kind of noise that would attract a security patrol's attention. The enemy patrol immediately changed direction, moving toward the sound of the rock slide. It would buy us precious minutes, but once they investigated and found nothing, they would resume their systematic search of our area. "Ghost Rider, this is Shadow Strike. Laser designation is steady. What's your status?" "Shadow Strike, we have visual on the target facility. Beginning weapon release sequence. Maintain laser designation for 90 more seconds after release." Through night vision, I searched the sky for any sign of the approaching bomber, but the B-2 Spirit lived up to its reputation. Even knowing exactly where it was and when it was arriving, the aircraft remained completely invisible. It was like being guided by a ghost. Wilson was concentrating intensely on maintaining the laser designation. "Beam is locked on target. No drift, no interference. We're good to go." That's when the surface-to-air missile systems began their target acquisition sequence. Warning lights activated around the facility, and I could see personnel running to battle stations. They might not be able to see the B-2 on radar, but they knew something was coming. "Ghost Rider, be advised enemy air defenses are activating. Recommend immediate weapon release." "Roger, Shadow Strike. Weapons away, maintain designation for impact confirmation." Somewhere above us, invisible and silent, the B-2 Spirit had released its payload. Multiple precision-guided munitions were now falling toward the nuclear facility, guided by Wilson's laser beam toward targets that had to be destroyed completely and permanently. The next 60 seconds were the longest of my life. We had to maintain our position and keep the laser steady while enemy patrols searched for us. Surface-to-air missiles swept the sky, and 2,000-pound bombs fell toward targets that were surrounded by professional soldiers who would do anything to protect their nuclear weapons program. 30 seconds to impact," Johnson announced quietly. I could see increased activity around the main building as personnel evacuated to defensive positions. Either they had detected the incoming munitions on their early warning systems, or their combat experience told them that something was about to happen. 15 seconds. Through binoculars, the facility looked peaceful in the pre-dawn darkness. Security lights illuminated the compound, personnel moved routinely between buildings, and there was no indication that their world was about to change forever. 10 seconds. 5. Impact. The first bomb struck the main building's southwest corner, exactly where Wilson's laser beam had been painting the target. The explosion was visible as a brilliant flash followed immediately by a shockwave that rattled equipment in our observation position 3 kilometers away. But that was just the beginning. The B-2 had released multiple munitions designed to penetrate hardened targets before detonating. As we watched, additional explosions erupted throughout the facility as bunker-buster bombs found their targets with devastating precision. The main building, which had housed the nuclear enrichment equipment, collapsed completely as sequential explosions destroyed its internal structure. The smaller support buildings were leveled by direct hits, and the vehicle maintenance facility disappeared in a fireball that lit up the entire valley. Wilson maintained laser designation throughout the bombing run, ensuring that every munition found its intended target. When the last explosion faded, the nuclear facility had been completely destroyed, leaving nothing but rubble and smoke where a weapons program had been operating just minutes earlier. Ghost Rider, this is Shadow Strike. All targets destroyed. Excellent work. Roger, Shadow Strike. Thanks for the guidance. Ghost Rider is departing area. Good luck getting home. As quickly as it had arrived, the B-2 Spirit disappeared into the darkness, beginning its long journey back to base. The most advanced bomber in history had completed its mission and vanished without the enemy ever seeing it coming. But our mission wasn't over. The explosions had eliminated any chance of remaining undetected, and every enemy soldier in the area now knew that a forward air controller team was operating somewhere in the surrounding ridges. We had minutes, maybe less, before organized search teams would be hunting us with everything they had. Time to go, I announced. Wilson, secure that designator. Thompson, watch our 6. Johnson, Martinez. We're moving to escape route Alpha. As we began our withdrawal from the observation position, I took one last look at what remained of the nuclear facility. Where sophisticated buildings and defensive positions had stood just minutes earlier, there was now only devastation. The nuclear enrichment program that had threatened American interests and regional stability had been permanently eliminated. But looking at the destruction, I couldn't help wondering what we might have prevented. How close had they been to completing a nuclear weapon? What would have happened if intelligence had discovered the facility a month later, or if the mission had been delayed for any reason? These were questions that would probably never be answered. Classified secrets that would remain buried in intelligence files that most people would never see. But as we moved through hostile territory toward our extraction point, I knew that we had been part of something significant, something that had prevented a much larger catastrophe. The hardest part of our mission was just beginning. We had to reach our extraction point, while every enemy soldier in the area searched for the team that had guided death from above to their most important facility. What do you think is going to happen next? Drop a comment below and let me know how you think we managed to escape from hostile territory after completing one of the most classified missions in modern military history. The facility was gone, but we were still 15 kilometers deep in hostile territory, with every enemy soldier in the region hunting for us. The explosions had lit up the valley like daylight, and there was no doubt that search teams were already mobilizing to find the forward air controller team responsible for guiding that devastating attack. "Move fast, move quiet," I whispered as we began our withdrawal toward the extraction point. The route would take us through the same terrain we'd crossed during insertion, but now the enemy knew we were here. Thompson was monitoring radio intercepts as we moved. "Sergeant Major, they're coordinating search teams on multiple frequencies. I count at least 6 different units being deployed to sweep the surrounding ridges." We had one advantage. Our extraction point was in the opposite direction from where most people would expect us to go. Instead of heading toward friendly lines, we were moving deeper into disputed territory where a helicopter could pick us up without crossing heavily defended airspace. The first 2 hours of movement went smoothly. We used the same ravines and rock formations that had concealed us during insertion, moving carefully but quickly toward coordinates that existed only in our memories and GPS devices. But at 0630 hours, Wilson spotted the first search team. Patrol, 11 o'clock, approximately 600 meters. Through binoculars, I could see 8 soldiers working their way along a ridgeline parallel to our route. They were equipped with night vision gear and moving in professional tactical formation. These weren't militia members conducting a random search. They were trained soldiers following a systematic plan. Change of route, I decided. We'll use the alternate path through the Northern Valley. It's longer, but it should keep us clear of their search pattern. The alternate route added 3 kilometers to our journey and took us through terrain that offered less concealment, but it was better than walking into an organized search team. We adjusted our movement and continued toward the extraction point. As dawn broke, our situation became more challenging. Daylight eliminated our night vision advantage and made us visible to air reconnaissance that was undoubtedly being deployed. The enemy had helicopters, and they would be using them to search areas that ground teams couldn't reach quickly. Johnson was monitoring aviation frequencies when he picked up the transmission we'd been dreading. "Sergeant Major, helicopter inbound from the south. Sounds like a search pattern." The helicopter appeared as a distant dot on the horizon, but it was clearly flying a systematic search pattern that would eventually bring it over our position. We found concealment under an overhanging rock formation and waited while the aircraft passed overhead. For 20 minutes, the helicopter circled our area, sometimes passing close enough that we could see the crew scanning the terrain with binoculars. They were looking for us specifically, not conducting a routine patrol. After the helicopter moved on, we continued our withdrawal, but the encounter had cost us valuable time. Our extraction window was scheduled for 1,200 hours, and delays meant spending more time in territory that was becoming increasingly dangerous. At 1,000 hours, we reached our final checkpoint before the extraction point. Through binoculars, I could see the landing zone, a flat area surrounded by low hills that would provide some protection for the helicopter during pickup. But I could also see that we weren't the only ones who knew about this location. "Enemy squad setting up positions overlooking the landing zone," Thompson reported. "Looks like they figured out where we're headed." 12 soldiers were establishing an ambush position that would give them clear fields of fire over the entire extraction area. If our helicopter attempted to land, it would be flying into a kill zone. I made the hardest decision of the entire operation. "Johnson, transmit abort code to Extraction Bird. Tell them the landing zone is compromised." The response came back immediately. "Roger, Shadow Strike. We copy abort. Alternate extraction point Alpha is available in 4 hours. 4 more hours in hostile territory while search teams closed in on our position. The alternate extraction point was 8 kilometers away through terrain that was probably being watched by additional enemy forces, but we didn't have a choice. Martinez was showing signs of fatigue from carrying extra medical supplies. Wilson was exhausted from the stress of maintaining laser designation during the bombing run, and all of us were running on adrenaline that wouldn't last much longer. The movement to the alternate extraction point was the most dangerous 8 kilometers I've ever covered. We had to cross 2 roads, traverse open ground that was visible from multiple directions, and navigate through terrain that offered minimal concealment. Twice, we had to take cover while enemy patrols passed within 100 meters of our position. Once, we were forced to detour around a checkpoint that hadn't existed during our insertion. The enemy was adapting faster than we were moving. At 15:30 hours, we finally reached the alternate extraction point. This landing zone was smaller and more confined than the primary site, surrounded by hills that would make helicopter approach and departure more difficult. But it appeared to be uncompromised. "Johnson, signal the extraction bird. We're in position." "Roger, Sergeant Major. Extraction helicopter is inbound. ETA 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes felt like hours. We established security positions around the landing zone while listening for sounds of approaching enemy forces. In the distance, we could hear helicopters conducting search patterns, but none of them seemed to be heading directly toward our location. At 15:45 hours, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distinctive rotor noise of an American helicopter approaching our position. Chief Warrant Officer Chen was right on schedule, flying low and fast through hostile airspace to bring us home. The Black Hawk settled into the landing zone for exactly 30 seconds. We ran across open ground with all our equipment, dove through the helicopter's doors, and were airborne before the enemy could react to our presence. As we climbed away from the extraction point, I looked back at the valley where the nuclear facility had been. Smoke was still rising from the ruins, and I could see search teams continuing to scour the area for any trace of the forward air controller team that had guided the B-2 Spirit to its target. "Sergeant Major," Chen's voice came through my headset. "I hear you boys had quite a party last night." "Something like that, Chief. Thanks for the ride home." During the flight back to base, I had time to reflect on what we'd accomplished. Shadow Strike had been successful. The nuclear facility was completely destroyed. The weapons program was eliminated, and my team was coming home alive. But the mission had also revealed how close we'd come to a much larger catastrophe. If intelligence had discovered the facility a few weeks later, or if the mission had been delayed for any reason, those nuclear materials might have been completed and deployed. The B-2 Spirit's precision strike capability had eliminated a threat that could have destabilized an entire region. Back at base, the debriefing lasted 8 hours. Intelligence officers wanted to know everything we'd observed. Mission planners needed to understand what had worked and what needed improvement, and senior commanders wanted confirmation that the nuclear threat had been completely eliminated. The official records of Shadow Strike remain classified, and they probably always will. Most people will never know that a small team of forward air controllers guided America's most advanced bomber to eliminate a nuclear weapons program that threatened regional stability. But I'll never forget the sound of those bombs finding their targets, or the sight of the B-2 Spirit's precision munitions turning a nuclear facility into rubble. Modern warfare isn't just about soldiers with rifles. It's about technology, precision, and the ability to project power anywhere in the world when American interests are threatened. The B-2 Spirit proved that night that American air power could reach any target, anywhere, at any time, and my team proved that sometimes the most important missions are the ones that nobody ever hears about. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel so you're notified when I share more stories from my 25 years of military service. Hit that like button if you appreciate real military operations, and leave a comment telling me what you thought about this story. Also, don't forget that all the gear and products I use and recommend are linked in the description or pinned in the first comment. Shadow Strike was just one mission out of hundreds I participated in during my career, but it was the one that showed me how small teams of dedicated soldiers can change the course of history. Sometimes, the most important victories are the ones that prevent conflicts rather than winning them. Until next time, this is Steve Harris reminding you that freedom isn't free, and sometimes the price of peace is paid by people whose names you'll never know, in places that don't exist on any map, doing things that will never appear in any history book. But that's what we signed up for when we took the oath to defend America and our allies. It was an honor to serve, and it's an honor to share these stories with people who understand what military service really means. Stay safe out there, and remember that somewhere tonight, American soldiers are standing watch so the rest of us can sleep peacefully.